I'm David Bliss, the CEO of Faraday Microgrids. This is our next in the series of the Don't Panic webinars about alternate sources of power for skilled nursing facilities in California in response to the AB 2511 law that was passed last year. Some of you will already have been on our prior webinars, so you'll be familiar with our format. One little difference of what we're going to be doing today is it's more of a town hall format in which we'll ask people to participate as a group and provide questions or comments. We've got a few experts that I've invited to join us to speak to those questions and to also raise some of the issues specific to their areas. There's a few housekeeping issues that I want to go through first of all. First, thanks to Mazzetti, who's provided the Zoom host, and Jess Heyman, who's doing her part to help administer things, and to the Goalposts group with David McAndrews, who's also helping to administer this. We've got, as I said, this panel of experts to help answer questions. So I'll let them each give a little introduction about themselves in a minute, but we've got Jamie Schnick and Tim Pylan from the Healthcare Access and Information Agency. Jason Belden from, help me out, Jason, healthcare or HCAHF, I guess.
Yeah, California Association of Health Facilities.
Thank you. I was going to butcher it otherwise. Mike Gravely from the California Energy Commission, and then John Griffiths, who's a design professional and engineer who's been involved in microgrid design and the like. So with that, well, when you have questions or comments, you can raise your hand and we will try to unmute you at that point to ask questions. If you want to write questions in, please use the Q&A function. The chat function is live, but it would be more efficient to use Q&A. And again, our focus today will be a wide-ranging discussion around the implications of the law and how we might approach the new power standards for skilled nursing facilities. So really quick, if I may, I'll just point to each individual and ask them to give a couple sentences about themselves. Jamie, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Jamie Schnick, Senior Electrical Engineer with HCAI in the Building Standard Units. I was one of the main authors of PIN 74, which provided policy for the new law passed, as we know, called AB 2511.
Great, thanks, Jamie. And then Tim, will you give us a little bit of your autobiography?
Sure. I'm Tim Pyland. I'm a senior structural engineer here at OSHPA, Office of Statewide Hospital Planning and Development. I run the Special Certification Pre-Approval Program and review all the shake table testing over the test plans, et cetera, to obtain the pre-approval of all the equipment that needs to be structurally stable and functional after a major seismic event.
Fantastic, thank you. And then John Griffiths, can you give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, great. Well, good morning. Nice to meet everyone. My name is John Griffiths. I'm an electrical engineer and been involved in a number of microgrids. You're working with Faraday, and first was the Kaiser Richmond microgrid, and I'm also currently involved in the Kaiser Ontario microgrid, and I'm an electrical representative of the HCAI on the HCAI board. So I'm really excited to talk to everyone and hear all your questions.
Great. I saw Mike Gravely pop up and then lost your video. But Mike, if you're able to give a little background, that would be great.
Yeah, Mike Gravely. I'm video challenged here, so if I use the video, I'll probably lose the audio. So I'm gonna just I'll turn it on when I'm talking, but not all the time. I've been working at the Energy Commission over 20 years. I'm a senior electrical engineer team lead. I've been focusing on microgrids and alternatives to diesel and non-lithium ion battery alternatives. So a lot of research on microgrids. The commission has funded over 50 microgrids in a variety of applications. And as you'll learn today, the microgrid pricing is coming down and the value is going up. And also the commission as a whole is always interested in alternative to diesel. So we will continue to work that. We do sponsor grants at times, and so in the case of microgrids, the PUC has a large microgrid budget for disadvantaged under-resourced communities. Anyway, so happy to help. We have a lot of historical data that we can share also with that. So happy to help today. Take care.
Thanks, Mike. And then Jason, can you give us your background?
Sure. My name is Jason Belden. I'm the Director of Emergency Preparedness and Physical Plant Services for the California Association of Health Facilities. we represent the skilled nursing facilities and intermediate care facilities for the developmentally disabled. My background, I've been with CAHF for over a decade now as their emergency manager. The physical plant services is more like other duties is assigned for me. My background prior to coming here, I was a fire chief for the city and community of Vacaville for 22 years prior to coming to work for CAHF. So my background is not from a building side. It comes from a life safety side. But I've been intimately involved in the development of this legislation with the previous authors, and we were successful in getting it vetoed a couple times. And this is the third go round. And so I have some historical background. I have some background with the current author of the bill. They certainly don't see it the way that it turned out to be, and I tried to explain it to them in the draft rulemaking process. And I can, we can talk about that as we go on. I don't know that it's material to the conversation, but I just think this is kind of morphed into something that the author did not plan for. And so maybe that's important for background. And as we go forward, when we advocate for maybe some changes to the bill, that will be a part of our advocacy. Is that was not the intention of the author. So with that, I want to say thank you, and thank you for having me, Dave. I appreciate it. Thank
Oh, no, we're thrilled to have you on. And I did mean to say earlier, and I neglected to say this, I do want to make clear there's a lot of folks that are participating. First of all, out of goodness, everyone's doing this as a volunteer. But I also want to say, the folks that are on the call, and particularly from the regulatory agencies, have been tasked with implementing this. And so it's, as much as we might want to go after some people for the features of the law is written by the legislature, and then the regulatory agencies are tasked with finding ways to enforce them. So they don't have the option or opportunity to make modifications or even recommendations per se. So just out of politeness to particularly HCAI folks and CEC folks, keep in mind that they're here representing the necessary regulatory aspects. With that said, if there's anyone in the community of participants that wants to jump in and give their background and interest and what they might add to the conversation, happy to have anyone do that now. I saw a number of names I recognize, but I don't want to call out people that I didn't warn. And while we're doing that, if you have questions that you want to formulate, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. Otherwise, I have a long list of questions I can start with our team and begin to compile some ideas here. So if I don't see questions, I will jump in, but please go, continue to put those in as we go. So until we hear somebody raise their hands, I'm going to go ahead and start asking a couple of questions. So first of all, this goes to our regulatory folks and to some degree to Jason as well. Have any follow-up guidelines been issued by the governor, legislature, CDPH, or any other parties to the process? And Jamie, maybe you and Tim can comment there.
Sure. No, there hasn't been any follow-up. We were contacted by the author of the bill. There was concern that we were looking at heating. Essentially, we revised our survey, I think, to kind of put those issues to rest, but there has been no change on the law and the requirements.
And Tim, the seismic certification remains in place, and I imagine, can you give people a brief overview of who might not be familiar with seismic certification and what that looks like, particularly for energy assets that may not yet be certified?
Okay, so there's currently, as an example, batteries. Batteries are listed in 1705A 13.3.1 or 14.3.1 in the 2022 code as requiring special seismic certification. Now, there's a lot of battery rack assemblies that have been seismically certified. What that involves, I'm just using batteries as an example. What that involves is shake table testing the equipment as it will be installed in the field. You may have several different configurations that you're trying to install. Usually the manufacturers will limit those to 2 or 3 configurations so they can test them all at once without spending a lot of lab time and incurring more expense. The last thing we wish to do as an agency is to impose additional restrictions or cost upon the private practice. So typically a test plan meeting is set up with me in the office here, either online, or you can come in person. We go over the components that require special assignment certification. I try to minimize the number of tests required to end up with the product you want to install in the field and have it seismically certified. There's several different protocols that you can use for shake table tests. There's ICC ES AC 156, which is the listed in the California Building Code. Other acceptable test measures are GR63 core that the manufacturers typically use for shipping their components. There's a seismic portion of it that can be used for shake table testing. There's IEEE 693, there's IEEE 344, which is the nuclear. We don't require the equipment to be active or energized, although batteries do need to be charged and connected when they are tested. Okay, so the equipment does not need to be, if have power run to it, but if in fact the equipment is energized by itself like a battery, well then yes, it would be energized and connected during shake table testing.
Right.
It's a pretty simple process. It's not as difficult as it may sound. We've been doing this in 2009. So
John, Griffiths, you had a comment?
Yeah, Tim, thanks for outlining that. Maybe if anybody else on the call has this question, as an electrical engineer, we have to be very aware, making sure we use the right seismic certification codes and references. But I have gotten feedback in the past from industry that if hopefully we get more solutions coming to the market, particularly sustainable ones. But when we do that, I'm hearing there's quite a time lag in terms of getting those pieces of equipment seismically certified. I don't know if you can talk to that, or if that's some questions you've heard. So basically, what does the vendor need to do to get their equipment seismically certified, and what are the typical timelines?
okay, so that's a very good question. How old is the information that you just recently cited? Was that recent, or was that a couple of years old, or do you recall?
That's a good question. I would say like 2 months ago.
2 months ago. Okay, so that's really fairly recent. A couple of years ago, when COVID was active, and we have the OSPs, which are seismically, there used to be the expiration date on all the OSPOD and OSPOD special seismic certification documents. We call them OSPs. OSPOD special seismic certification pre-approval program, the OSPs for all the equipment. They used to all expire every 3 years when the code changed. So back in 2020 or 2000, December 31st, 2019, we had some 250 of them expired. So it backed up all the labs. Everything was backed up here, approved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That has all gone away. That's all diminished. The lead time is very, very short. It's going to be more the manufacturer taking his equipment, taking it to the lab, having a test plan to figure out what you need to test, taking that to the laboratory. And I have a list of laboratories all over the United States. There's also foreign laboratories. And then the lab time right now, from what I understand, is there's not that much of a backlog. So once you do that and you shake table test it, then you have to work with a California licensed structural engineer who will review and approve the test report, which is typically issued by the laboratory. And then you submit that to OSPOD, and then we can turn it around within 2-3 weeks, fairly quickly. It's all online, submittal process. So the overall is not so much dependent upon us. It's dependent upon how fast you can, get your product, assemble what you need to test, get it to the test lab, have the test report written, and then sent to us for approval. Our end of it is very short, but your end may be a little bit.
So if I may, I'm gonna take the privilege of the chair. Jason, I'm gonna come back to you on that same question in just a second, but we do have a few questions in the Q&A that I want to get through. So first, I think I can answer quite straightforwardly, but I'll ask Jamie to correct me if I go astray. Questioner asks, can we have a fuel provider agreement to provide the 96 hours rather than having 96 hours of fuel on site? And as I read the law, and I think as Jamie's described it, you're required to have 6 hours of fuel on site and the ability to have the remainder delivered. Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, within the 6 hour period. In other words, you have to have continuity of services. Is that correct?
That's correct. And with the caveat that that plan, that contract that's in place needs to be submitted to CDPH for their approval. So we haven't seen that happen yet. So what we've the way we've set up our review process is it's a two-step review process. The first one would be a facility assessment. And in that assessment, you talk about various particulars of your facility, and you recommend if there's any gaps where you do not meet the law, you recommend how you're going to resolve that. So what we're recommending is that you do that first thing. And if you have if you're planning to set up a contract for fuel delivery, that you submit that as your proposed solution, and then we can get that pre-approved.
So I'm going to flip to Jason. And Jason, really now there's two questions for you. So the first is, about the fuel contracts. I know you have significant experience here. I'll ask you to comment on that. And second, if you can circle back to your group's efforts at lobbying and what you think might be on the table based on lobbying efforts. So both of those questions, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. I'll hop over the generator fuel supply issue because and the way Jamie explained it is kind of, and that's very consistent with the CMS requirements already in place. So facilities this should not be a surprise to a facility. They should have been surveyed to this already, quite frankly. If they've not, I understand it, but it's important. 6 hours, I get that's the minimum. If you've got 6 hours, you don't have enough. You need to get more, period, in the story, because if an earthquake happens, you're not going to get resupplied in 6 hours because there's 4, resuppliers for a general area. And it's not realistic to think that would be readily deployable during a disaster. And that I want to encourage folks, if you've got that minimum 6 hours, I realize you don't have to do this, but I encourage you as a best practice to add as much as you can so that you're not impacted. Or if there is a earthquake where we have 24 hours go between when we can be resupplied, then you have less concern. That would be my first thing to whoever asked that question. The second thing is, what advocacy efforts have we made? So we originally had, issues with the bill because we just thought that the term, alternate energy providing safe temperatures was going to create an issue in that we would have to harden or be able to island the buildings. And that's completely outside of the way these buildings were designed. And so our advocacy was one to remove that reference altogether. That was my concern. I tried to explain to them that we have had literally hundreds of examples of what happens during PSPS, where we have long-term power outages with people that have to get resupplied for their generator. And we've not had any negative outcomes as a result of those. Doesn't mean that it couldn't have occurred, but it's less of a concern than I think that this legislation tries to tackle. So when we asked them, we asked them obviously to not include that. The governor very specifically said that they had no intention of removing that requirement to tie HVAC to the generator. And so when they gave us that feedback, I kind of took that as we're kind of stuck with this. And whether we like it or not, we got to work with that. And that was our first ask. Our second ask was to have a more realistic approach to temperature range. In the CMS or in the Federal Register, it says 71 to 81 should be the temperature range in a skilled nursing facility, but I'm not certain that 71 to 81 is a comfortable temperature for everybody. Some people might have a preference for something less than 71 degrees. And so if we want to define something as safe and comfortable, I think we need to have a broader definition, and we've asked for that. In terms of what is considered safe, that could be a different definition. And so we've asked for something that's indicative of what National Institute of Health calls unsafe for those above 65. And so I think that would start at 65 degrees or 66 degrees. for an internal temperature. So asking for a broader range of what's allowed for the temperature range was a part of what we asked for. Whether that's going to be granted or not, I think there's some opportunity there. I certainly don't think 71 should be the lower metric, because we don't keep our buildings at 71. We try to keep them at 68, 67, 65. You know, it's uncommon to see a building running at 71, much less higher than that in the summertime. And so I go, we're going to be operating normally. So the advocacy we asked for was a broader definition of that. That was one of the things. And then we asked for just a lengthier or a longer time to become compliant. We asked that if a facility had submitted their assessment and they were in the process of going through becoming compliant and could not, either for whatever reason, could not become compliant before 2024 date, would just the application submittal process resolve them of any kind of exposure for a citation for not being compliant, provided they could demonstrate they're going through the process. And then the last thing we asked for was like a 5-year review window, or we asked it to be extended to 5 years with a 3-year review window to see how well we're doing. I think that's probably realistic if we're looking at the numbers that we think we are. Every facility I've talked to said all of my buildings are going to need something. I've not talked to anybody that said, I'm just going to fill out the form and my existing physical plant will make do. So I think those are realistic things that everybody here having gone through this process, looking at the raw numbers. There's no way we're going to get the whole state to do this in 5 years. Or in 1 year. 5 years is probably best case scenario, to be quite frank, and that's what we're asking for. We did say, you can give us a 3-year window, we'll come back and we'll present to you how well we're doing as a system. But those are the advocacy things we asked for. We still do have one opportunity to potentially impact this where it wouldn't require as substantial of an upgrade, is that under AB 1629, a previous law that governs our reimbursement, it basically says that if the state or the federal government mandates any costs, that they have to address those costs in Medi-Cal reimbursements. And the reimbursements don't come for another year and a half. We bill our rates, our costs now don't come into our rates until 2 years from now. But in any case, there is a reimbursement component to it. And we put a kind of a dollar price, a price tag on what we think this is going to cost the state to add to the Medi-Cal budget. And that's the only thing where we think that it may cause the governor to change direction. As of yet, I've not gotten any indication that's the case, but that is our only possibility where it may actually, because it could be over $1 billion for the state, and we're not in a great financial shape right now. And whether we want to absorb those costs, I don't know if the governor wants to do that. So we might have opportunity there, but we've been counseling all the providers. Is the feedback we've gotten from the governor's office is you should proceed like it's going forward. So, and if anything, maybe we can get an extension of the time, but that's about it.
Jason, thanks for reviewing that. I want to come back to some of the questions that are coming through in the chat. I'll tackle what may be a little bit more straightforward question first. Jamie, questioner asked, can we use fans plugged into backup generated plugs to comply with the safe temperature aspect? That's the question. I think implicit in that is not necessarily directly attaching the HVAC or other environmental systems to the alternate source, but instead using a workaround, like fans. Is that allowable?
The way we wrote the PIN is we tried to provide some possible solutions, but we indicated that we're open to other suggestions, recommendations. The solution would need to be able to if there's life-saving equipment and oxygen generating, we stipulated that would need to be back online within 10 seconds. If it's cooling, that would need to be online sufficient enough to maintain the temperatures identified, the in between temperatures identified. So what I would recommend for that type of solution is that someone, again, work with the assessment, which will identify the deficiencies and then propose in a kind of a basis of design format of how you're going to resolve those. And then we could look at it ahead of time to get pre-approval. So we're not kind of putting anything as not being acceptable. This is the novel ideas and people that are trying to make things work will be open to all of those suggestions, and we'll evaluate them to see that they meet the criteria.
And along those lines, Tim, just so we're clear, you would need to have a seismically certified system to do that, right? In other words, you can't just go to Home Depot and get fans and put them up. If this is for life-saving circumstances or health and safety, those fans and related systems would have to also be HCAI approved, seismically tested systems, I assume.
Correct. If they're required on life safety, they would be. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. As a sort of a more general question, is the facility, first of all, is the facility assessment required or an option for facilities to use as a guideline for them?
Required.
Well, in order to show compliance, you need to have a facility assessment that shows that it meets the requirements of the law. What we're suggesting is that that we're offering the option of doing the facility assessment before the remediation. That way you can be assured, kind of like buying insurance, that the solution that you designed and constructed will meet the requirements of the law. So hope that answers the question.
So as a follow-on to that, and I think this is a related question, but it adds a little bit more depth. What are the steps to compliance? I've been speaking, this is this questioner's wording. I've been speaking with numerous people and they say this replacement project would take over 2 years to accomplish, but enforcement starts January 2024. So I think to come back to the first question is the steps to compliance. And Jamie, it sounds like, and you'll correct me, the assessment is a first critical step to define deficiencies. So that's an internal clock, how long it takes a facility to do that. Then there's some time spent conferring with the HCAI staff about those gaps and plans to enter into mitigation or correction. And then there's the design and implementation. Is that sort of a fair overview?
Yes. Yes, the final piece then would be a reassessment to show that the facility is within compliance. But
Yeah.
yes, that's correct.
So I would assume then, and you'll correct me, the assessment piece you've discussed in previous webinars. And by the way, folks, if you're interested, the prior webinars have been recorded as is this one. I think I neglected to say that, by the way. This is being recorded. And so those are all open for access and you can refer back to prior episodes. But I think Jamie, you've addressed some of those steps in the past, and it sounds like it's going to be however this is phrased, a relatively quick process for you guys to get those assessments and work with folks. That doesn't sound like that's going to be the big delay. The bigger delay will be the funding, design, and implementation. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, sure. I think product delivery is going to be a challenge as well.
Yeah.
So-
Depending on what the solution has arrived at.
Yeah.
Yeah. John, you had a comment?
Right. Yeah, and I just to layer on, I can't think of any of my projects that aren't affected by the supply chain challenges. Hopefully, as we, time goes on, those will be better. But we're seeing in excess of a year for some critical components. So, something we're going to have to factor in.
Yeah, John and I are involved in a project together where we're seeing a 1 year lead time for transformers, as an example. So in that regard, as sort of a follow on to this, so I don't think we can give a concrete answer to the questioner about timing, but I think certainly everyone shares the concern that January 1st, 2024 will be a very ambitious timeframe to meet all aspects of this. But I think HCAI folks have expressed that more than anything, they're interested in seeing a concrete plan that's approved, that is achievable, and whether or not that something bad will happen at that date remains to be determined. But but I think the key is to have some process in place. With that said, Jason, you talked a little bit about funding here. This is a real economic challenge for skilled nursing facilities, many of which operate on very thin margins and are at risk. I'm going to guess, but I ask you to comment. There's probably not money sitting around in owners' pocketbooks to just go out and buy expensive energy systems, particularly assets that will just sit there and do very little for the economic benefit of the facilities like diesel. Any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I've talked to a number of providers. This is going to be really, really difficult for a lot of them. I think we can see, the words contraction, folks talking about, closing some and moving others into one. The folks just don't have the. There are a few of the larger corporations that I think are going to be able to weather this. There's so much legislative focus on kind of removing this, the homogenization of skilled nursing out of the industry and keeping, the kind of mom and pops and providers that have a vested interest in the outcomes of their residents. We want those people to stay in business, but we push everything to where only the Walmarts and the Targets can afford it. And so we're going to see these companies like Providence that has over 100 facilities, Ensign, which has 100 facilities. Those companies have enough cash flow where they can absorb this. The others, what's going to happen is those people are going to become bigger because they're going to buy out the other people that cannot afford. They don't have cash on hand to be able to do this. There are some opportunities which are very good if you're a nonprofit provider to access financing through the state of California at a very low interest rate, a fixed interest rate. Those are fantastic. What we have tried to do is try to explain to the state, hey, let's open up that financing authority so that all for-profits, if they serve X percentage of Medi-Cal patients, that they should have access to that funding because they're providing a public benefit to the state. We may have some luck with that. We tried it with Cal Mortgage to do that with Cal Mortgage as well, and they said no, they would have to change their bylaws. They couldn't do it. But outside of that, I don't have a lot of solutions, Dave. My hope is there are other folks on this call. I think from us in the last few years, we've tried to push our providers to really incorporating renewables, microgrids, other forms to kind of reduce their operating expenses. I realize there's capital expenditures to be able to purchase some of these things, but if you have to do it and you can save money operationally on the back end, you have to do this because this is not going to go away. So you have to figure out a way that you're going to be able to afford it. So that's all I can think of right now, Dave.
Thanks. And I'll make a comment to follow on with that in a second, but I want to bring Mike Gravely in because Mike, I believe, and Jason referred to this, I believe the CEC has a very low interest loan program for healthcare facilities in specific, although it may be broader than that, for energy system upgrades, and that the dollar value is potentially quite high. In other words, sufficient to cover the cost of this kind of thing. Is that something that a SNF could take advantage of? Oh, you're muted, Mike. You'll have to unmute.
Okay, I got double mute here. So it's an area I don't personally work. We do have a ECA program where they do low interest loans for energy efficiency improvements where you pay for the loan with the savings that you receive. I don't know if microgrids would fit into that category personally. So there is some of those opportunity. There are some research grants available to do demonstrations. We have funded two hospitals, both of them with Faraday or Bliss. One is completed in Richmond, one in one in Ontario. So we have looked at those to evaluate the cost and performance and value. But as far as loans, I would have to, that loan is tied to energy efficiency savings, not backup power, not replacing diesel. So it would have to have, you'd have to have an environment where in effect, the microgrid was paying for itself over time. And these are 10 or 15-year loans. These are not short-term loans in there. So, yeah, it's called HCAI, I think is how it's pronounced. And so there are some there. And again, for those that are interested in solutions, all the information we have is available on our website or available through people like me. So we do have data on what we learn on the cost of microgrids and the value of microgrids and what they can provide you. But most of your discussions here are all regulatory. So yeah, there are programs that's worth looking into, and you'd have to look at your particular application to see whether or not it was right for your organization.
Thanks, Mike. So I see a couple of hands go up. I want to make a couple comments. We are going to do the next webinar is going to be entirely devoted to the finance aspects. So we'll gloss over it here a little bit, or I will gloss over it here a little bit. But I want to say we're going to take a deeper dive about this. But I'll mention two things that are possible. So one is that there's green, what's called so-called green PACE lending. So that's essentially it's off balance sheet on property tax bill lending that you can do at variable interest rates depending on the lender, and it's paid back on the property taxes of the facility. And this actually works even with nonprofits that don't necessarily pay property taxes, interestingly enough. And it's a way to do it so it doesn't show up on the balance sheet. That's one option. The other is that the microgrid concept, because of changes in federal law, specifically the Inflation Reduction Act, makes it appealing both to the facility owner to be the owner of the system because of all the tax benefits from that. But even if they don't have the capital to do it, there's now a wealth of investors that want to buy systems on behalf of facilities and provide services below the current operating cost. And so that's a zero capital expense, lower operating expense scenario. But again, we'll talk about that in more detail at the next sitting. But I want to give Jamie and John in turn had a comment. I think Jamie, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I was just going to say the way that we put together PIN 74, we certainly allowed for the microgrid solution, which could be used to offset operating costs, energy costs for the facility. So that we've identified that as a code compliant solution.
John, you had a comment? We may have lost John there for a second. Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I think just very, very quickly, one thing when we're looking at supporting loads is, not to lose the sight of reducing the load that you're supporting. If you're installing a generator or a battery system, really certainly with the heat pump solutions, I think it's critical that we, again, it's stating obvious, but look at reducing the loads first.
So I'm going to pivot to a non-financial question. We have a question who asked, is it acceptable to have 55-gallon drums of fuel stored at the generator site with berm control under them? So I think that's going to fall to Tim or to, I know Nancy Timmons is on, and I don't want to pick on you, Nancy, because I didn't warn you, but fire life safety. But Tim, let's start with you. Any comments about that as a concept? And of course, Jamie, always welcome to comment as well.
This is more directed towards Nancy.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't mind stepping in. Thank you, David. So this is Nancy. I'm the Chief Fire and Life Safety Officer with OSHPD. And there are several requirements for fuel storage, both in whatever manner it is, whether it's in the drums or the tanks, the above ground tanks, the underground tanks. So that it doesn't provide an immediate, if somebody's out there, well, that's something to think about, but there are definitely requirements that would have to be met to take a look at that and look at the site specific. So each site, the code is the code, but each site and its layout of where that could be, if it can be there, it's something that could be looked at, but there are definitely code requirements for any kind of fuel storage.
So Nancy, I'm assuming that you would have to have approved storage devices, HCAI approved storage devices, as well as the sort of location, volume, safety systems, et cetera, that it's really several different layers there.
Definitely many layers. Thank you for that, David. There are different containers are regulated. There's regulations for everything. And
Sure.
The different container types will have regulations that they have to meet as well.
So following
So-
on that question, if somebody were using a natural gas generator, just unusual, right? But let's just say that they were doing that and it was an approved generator, could they have an above ground LNG or CNG, compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas system to meet the 96-hour supply requirement or to resupply, assuming that system, that storage system otherwise met the life safety requirements?
So that is an option. However, when out, in California with earthquakes, with natural gas isn't the way to go typically. And then storage, for conversion fuel, yeah, the storage for there, I guess that's the same kind of answer. It's that there are storage requirements that have to be met, and both in the type of tank and the location that would be in. But
Gotcha.
to be the main supply out there, that isn't going to be more than likely, it's not going to be a continuous supply in the event of an earthquake.
And
So
does
that-
it
that
matter? Oh, I apologize, Nancy. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's okay, David.
Does it matter whether the fuel source is considered explosive or non-explosive in the code? In other words, one of the things about diesel is it's not considered as great an explosive risk as is, say, natural gas or propane or the like. Does that have any impact, for example, on the distance to the facility that a system might have to be placed?
Yes, definitely. Even the batteries have specific requirements of where they can be placed. So they're depending on let me stick with the first question. So yes, the type of fuel will have different requirements, and not only the requirements of the fire code that have to be met, but any of the reference standards that are applicable to the type of fuel or container that's being used. And then again, same with the standards that container is listed to and tested to. And for the batteries, there are requirements for where those can be on the property. And there are requirements in CFC 12, the fire code, California Fire Code, Chapter 12. That's a start. That's not where you'll stay. Of course, with the code, you're going to be all over the code and different reference standards. But the type of, there's requirements for if it's mobile, if it's in a building, if it's in an enclosure like you might see for a larger generator, and if it's in its own battery storage. There are different requirements for each type, and some of the distances are as much as 20 feet away from property lines, other buildings, the building itself. So for some of our SNFs, that's difficult. That's hard to get to, but it changes, the distance changes based on the type of containment and the type of enclosure that's in, and it can get closer. It just depends on the enclosure that battery system is in. So definitely something, it's not just a fuel thing, combustible, flammable liquid. It's not just that, it's also the batteries that have similar topics to look at in the code.
Right. Jamie, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, anything that adds something new to the site is going to have to go through local agency, environmental, APCD. So we've been working on the microgrid solution for some time, and one of the big challenges is the fuel storage. Like you said, diesel it's actually non-flammable. You can throw a match in a lit container and it will not ignite. It needs to be raised to a certain temperature so that danger is less. And so when you get away from diesel, the danger becomes more, and the distance to adjacent buildings and property lines becomes larger.
John, you had a comment?
Yeah, just as a follow-on, just thinking about generators. One of the other thing that is noise. I know that's not under HCAI, but a lot of municipalities have, because of the PSPS, the generators were running for a very long very long periods of time have produced some very stringent noise criteria. So, for testing and other things, and just if somebody is an owner looking at, I have a generator, where am I going to locate that? I think just be mindful of the local legislation, and the same for planning. If you have a generator and you put a base tank, these can get pretty high. So yeah, I don't really have a solution, but certainly from my experience, the noise can be very challenging, particularly in where a lot of these skilled nursing facilities are, in sort of urban areas or residential areas even.
Yeah, not to mention the air quality restrictions as well, the emissions restrictions. I don't want to miss. There's a comment / question, and I'll read it. Is the goal to wipe out smaller owner operators? That's what it sounds like. This will cost $2 million plus. So I'll not so much answer, but comment, I guess. This is obviously a big concern, and I'll ask Jason to particularly, reflect on that in just a second. But yeah, I think we've done a little back of the envelope math, and think, so a smaller facility, this will probably be about a $500,000 kind of project, and larger facilities will go up from there. So it's reasonable to assume that this is quite costly, and that's why Jason and others have been expressing concern. But Jason, have you guys done any math independently to try to look at what this would cost, especially smaller facilities?
Yeah, I mean, all I could do is look at historical data based on finished projects with HCAI. So I can go through the data and look at, what does a traditional generator project cost, and how long does it traditionally last? And so on average is about $474,000 per facility for a generator. And it's about a 27-month lead time from start to finish, from permit application to final occupancy sign off is an average about 27 months. And so those are the averages that we gave to the state. And we said, if we extrapolate this times 1,200 facilities, this is kind of what the cost is. Now, some facilities are going to be much less expensive than that, and some are going to be considerably more expensive than that, because they don't have a feasible place to put this new alternate source of energy. The existing space in which they had it was a closet or a room or something like that, and now they can no longer size the appropriate generator in the space they had. So they'll have to develop other space for that, whether it's roof mounted or somewhere else, especially if they've got a really small footprint for their building size. So there are a number of conditions that could drive the cost exponentially, but I think the average we anticipate is about 500,000, or just give or take a little less than that. If you're just doing the generator, obviously, if you got to do a transfer switch or electrical panels or anything else, it's obviously going to drive the cost quite a bit. So, but I think that's about what HCAI put a guesstimate onto. I don't think we're out of the ballpark here. So
you mentioned this just now, and you talked about it earlier, Jason, the idea of islanding, and the approach has been at most high occupancy buildings, acute care facilities, to use automatic transfer switches or ATSs. John, you can comment on the technical aspects of that perhaps, but Jamie, can you address, is that as we are interpreting it, obligatory that facilities have to be able to physically isolate from the grid and island? And are there other tools beyond ATSs that could satisfy that requirement, if so?
Sure. Good question. I can go first. So the way we wrote our PIN 74, we identified 3 possible avenues to meet the new requirements. One would be to work with your existing emergency generator, which would typically by code already has transfer switches, and either modify that, or if there's capacity, transfer the cooling over to underneath the existing generator. That's not an islanding solution. Essentially, you have a transfer switch and the utility company is still connected to your main distribution board. It's just that when that power source becomes unreliable, then the generators take over and the power flow goes through the transfer switch. The second solution was code mandated standby power, and that would be again utilizing a transfer switch, which would not present the opportunity for islanding mode. The microgrid, which solution, which is the California Electric Code 705 for interconnected electrical services, would be a islanding solution. In that case, you tie directly to the normal distribution board, and you have a set of relays that allows that when the utility is unreliable, there's a disconnection, and you're actually backfeeding the main distribution board with your on-site resources. And so you could continue to operate as long as your fuel supply is available indefinitely, independent of the grid. So there's, I hope that answers the question about islanding or not. It would be an acceptable solution. It would meet the requirements of the law, but it's not the only solution.
So John, you were the engineer designing the system for the San Benito Clinic in Hollister, California, which is sort of analogous to what's being done here, right? It's a facility that about the size of a small nursing facility. In that case, you used the ATSs or an ATS, but how do you view that as a design professional?
Yeah, well, that's a great point. And thank you for bringing it up. I think that, and I'll sort of come back to my question about the seismic certification. So in a non-HCAI, non-HCAI building, be commercial or residential, from a renewable, from a generator, you have to have an ATS. You can do it through breaker pairs and a switchboard. Whereas most renewable microgrids, or I always use the example of a Tesla Powerwall system. You have a gateway that allows to have utility certified disconnect, which does the islanding, and then you have, and the power is fed through. And I think it's an important term, hybrid inverter. Any takeaways? So essentially, the hybrid inverter takes the distributed energy resource, be that battery, solar, and a lot of the ones that are coming to the market you can connect a small generator or other power source, and then that exports the AC to the building and back. But getting to the Tim's point, I think it's a very elegant solution. It switches in 100 milliseconds, so it goes from utility to battery or solar, a microgrid. The lights don't flicker, and I think I mentioned it in the last presentation. In terms of occupant experience, if you can have that really fast switching that those provide, you don't have to reset the doors, fire smoke dampers, all these other things in the power outages. But I don't know if there's any vendors or equipment suppliers on the call. I really appeal to you to bring those to market, get those seismically certified, so electrical engineers like myself can specify developers such as Faraday, we can deliver these solutions. But getting back to your point, David, that was what we did at San Benito, and it's a great project. I think it's maybe we could share it in the chat. It's on my website and Faraday's, but we did modify an existing infrastructure. It was a clinic, but we reduced loads. They had a generator. We integrated that. Sorry, the last point is if you do have it connected to a hybrid inverter, let's say in a long or a seismic event, fuel, you can get, it's being in short supply, and also it's expensive. Whereas a hybrid inverter works is you're going to use in an island mode, if the utility is not available, you're going to use the battery, solar, or whatever distributed generation source you have. And if it gets below that, you're going to call on the generator. So a generator in a normal building runs at really low efficiency because a lot of times it just slides to the biggest load. So when it runs connected to a hybrid inverter, it's going to be able to run its optimum efficiency, 80 to 90%. So for whatever amount of fuel you have, be that gas or diesel, you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck in that. So anyhow, a couple of takeaways from my experience delivering these, and that was recognized at the San Benito project.
I did want to add, and I don't want to make everyone's life more complicated, but you do brush up with these designs with a couple of important rules from the California Public Utilities Commission, and like Rule 21 and probably being the most important, but Rule 2 as well. So Rule 21 is sometimes called the anti-islanding rule, which essentially is intended to protect line workers so that if the grid goes down, there's no export of power to the utility that might injure a line worker. And that's why sometimes these physical isolation systems are a better solution, because essentially that physically prevents power from being exported and meets the rule entirely, while allowing you to then meet the timing requirements of this law in particular, because the conflict would be that the CPUC rule requires a much longer downtime and black start if you're not isolated than is specified in AB 2511 and in the other governing codes. So we're coming towards the end of the hour. We've got about 5 minutes left. I wanted to, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. So I want to give folks who participated or anyone else who wants to talk a chance to make any final comments. I'll ask everyone to be as brief as possible because we do only have 4 minutes. So anyone have any closing thoughts that we haven't gotten to? Jamie, I'll give you a first shot.
I'll just say we're here to help. We're I encourage people to start working on their assessments and sending them in so we can start processing them. We can come to an agreement together of what the solution would be to meet the new requirements of the law.
And Tim, if anyone wants to sort of dig deeper into the structural component of this, the seismic piece, do they reach out to you directly? Do they go through the HCAI website? What's the best way to engage?
Just contact me directly, either call me or send me an email. I can send, you have my email address, obviously, you have my phone number.
Yep.
Feel free to issue it and have them call me directly.
Thank you. Jason, any closing comments?
Yeah, can I just say, if you're a provider and you're calling HCAI, don't yell at these folks. I know you mentioned that earlier, Dave. Just so for background, the HCAI, the folks high up at HCAI, they didn't want this either. They went to the governor and said the same things that we said. So we're both in alignment here. We're just trying to make the best out of whatever the governor wants us to do. So if you're a provider, please don't give these folks a hard time. Just ask them and they'll try to get you through the process. That's all I got. And we're still working on it, Dave. We're, you know, if we got any improvement in the bill, we'll let everybody know. So
perfect. Nancy, I saw you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jason, for that too. But I did want to say thank you for having us here and part of this call as well. And like Jamie mentioned, if you and Tim, anything at all that, you know, if you got questions, please reach out to us. There's one thing Jamie mentioned, I just wanted to add on to that, is the other agency requirements like CUPA for the hazardous materials, that they are running into the same problems that many of us probably have, or staffing. And due to that, getting the inspections out that they need, they're really backlogged with that. So if you're going to go the route of adding a generator or adding a fuel tank, please keep in mind their approvals also needed. You work with us and them at the same time as far as testing, so you only have to do it once. But please keep in mind that will add time to get the CUPA approval as well.
Thanks, Nancy. Appreciate that. Mike Gravely,
Thank
any comments from a CEC perspective to close?
No, the only comment I have is we are working, obviously not on this timeline, but we're working for alternatives to diesel that would include solar storage, wind, green hydrogen, and other things. They're obviously much more expensive today than lithium ion or diesel, but those prices are coming down, and we are funding many opportunities. And Department of Energy is putting a lot of effort with the money they're getting into bringing these clean solutions. So yeah, in the long term, there will be more options, but I think that the schedule you're on right now, I think what you're hearing here is much more practical than some of these emerging technologies. But we continue to work to get those technologies proven and certified for operations like this.
And then John Griffiths, give you the final word other than me.
Oh my gosh, I'll try and make it. Well, yeah, well, thanks everyone. And, you know, each time I do these, I learn. But, you know, things are moving quickly. You know, electrical engineering didn't typically change, but, you know, the solutions are changing rapidly, and also the challenges we face in climate change and temperature. And I think as a community, just look to share. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. And, you know, I'm sure we'll get there and make buildings more sustainable and resilient. So thank you.
Well, thanks, everybody. I want to thank all the folks who volunteered to participate today. Everyone's doing this out of goodness. Nobody's being compensated or anything else. And these are all really experts in their respective areas. And I'm extraordinarily grateful that you've all taken this amount of time to do this, not just once, but several times. And particularly the folks that jumped in at the last moment. So Jason and Tim and Nancy specifically, thank you very much for being willing on short notice to come in. I do want to again mention we're going to do this financial deep dive at our follow-up webinar. So I hope folks will jump on that, because it'll be a real opportunity to talk about targeted incentives that can have a big impact, and alternative funding approaches that might make this far less painful, in fact, even successful for the industry. With that, we'll close for today. And again, thank you to Mazzetti for hosting, and to Goalpost for helping to organize, and to all the panelists and participants. We really very much appreciate everyone's time.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
all the
you,
great
everyone.
questions.
Take care.
Bye now.